All right, so 2026 has been a pretty crazy year for games. A lot of great games came out, like Pragmata, Resident Evil Requiem, Crimson Desert, etc. And then this game Mixtape comes out, right? It's quote unquote indie, however you guys want to look at it, etc. Right? And it sparks tons of controversy between gamers, between journalists. I think every year we need to have one of these games that causes some type of controversy, and Mixtape happens to be the one. Now, what is the controversy? A lot of people are saying that this is an industry plant game that Annapurna, who's, a very wealthy company, the owner is the daughter of one of the fifth richest people in the world or something like that. And this game is being shilled as like an indie game. It got, tens out of tens by tons of media outlets. And because of that, people are claiming this game is an industry plant, a game that was put in by the industry to get tons of these reviews and kind of make a splash out of nowhere, right? And I'm gonna be honest, like before this game came out, before the controversy, I was kind of curious about what this game would be. Um, I'm kind of a shill for coming of age stories. I love those type of movies, especially movies like Superbad. I grew up watching Perks of Being a Wallflower. Like these are types of concepts that I love to enjoy in movies. In games, it's very hit or miss. I think it's a little harder to do a coming of age story and not make it cringy in video games. So I was still keeping my eyes on it. Then the game released and it did good, pretty good reviews. So I decided, why not? I think it was like $17 on PlayStation Store. So and it was like 3 hours long. So like I'm gonna be honest, I was very interested and I was curious. So I went, I bought it. I didn't play immediately because I was playing other games, arguably better games like Soros, etc. And then all the controversy happened, and then I got even more curious about, okay, what are people talking about? How bad can this game be? People were, destroying this game left and right, and just kind of like really poo-pooing on the whole game. And then I don't know. It just kind of blew up to this, scale that I don't think anyone really anticipated it to be, which I thought was very interesting. So in this video, yes, I am gonna be reviewing Mixtape after playing the game. I do want to address the controversy and the whole industry plant, in quotations, accusation. So, first things first that I do want to kind of dispel is if you're coming to this video because you want your biased, your already perceived narrative to be, validated, I'm probably not going to do that because, spoiler alert, I actually do like this game. If you call it a game, it's very questionable as far as the game side of it. And I am going to talk about all the things that I hate about this game. For what it's worth, I agree this game is not a 10 out of 10, and anyone who thinks this is a 10 out of 10 is smoking something crazy. I don't think this game is better than other games that came out this year, like Pragmata, Resident Evil, even games that I don't really love, like Mouse PI for Hire. I think is still a better game than this game is, right? Now, with all that being said, let's just get further into this industry plant and where I start to think, no, it's not an industry plant. Um, a lot of the arguments that I see online are people saying, "Oh, well, IGN gave it a 10 out of 10, a 10 out of 10 over games like Crimson Desert, Pragmata, Resident Evil Requiem, etc." Sure, but at what point did we as gamers start revalidating IGN's reviews? I thought we all came together a long time ago and said IGN is hogwash and we don't listen to them. So using them as the basis of, oh, this game is getting perfect 10 out of 10 scores, I think that's a little think it's a little skewed, right? If we were to pull up the Metacritic score, I believe it landed at like an 86, which in comparison to games like Resident Evil Requiem, I got an 89. Mind you, it's an 86 off of 33 reviews, and Resident Evil Requiem is like 89 off of like 100 plus reviews. So, yes, I still think all is right in the world where a game that's an actually really good game is still outclassing this. You know, plus this has very small, you know, wave space as far as how much reviews it actually got. So I do think in terms of industry plan, I don't see that much. I do understand where people are like, oh, well, they sent out a bunch of content creator stuff, and yes, they're marketing the game. Yes, they want good media and press about this game. Any good marketing team is going to try and do their best to get good marketing press around their game. That's what their job is doing, and they did a good job of it. So I don't necessarily think that certain people giving this game a 10 out of 10 indicates this game did something nefarious, etc. With that being said, I think the people who gave this game a 10 out of 10 are a very specific demographic of human beings. And as I get into this review, I'm gonna, elaborate further on that. So just kind of keep that in mind. The last point that I see people saying that makes this game a big industry plant is like it's being titled as indie, but it's being, published by Annapurna, who's a huge, they have money. Annapurna has money, right? And I don't know. I guess it's like the term indie has gone so vague over the last, decade. Games like Clear Obscure are indie, games like, Baldur's Gate 3 are indie. Indie games can have huge budgets. We've proven this time and time again. Cyberpunk was an indie game for what it's worth. So I think just because a game is titled as indie but comes from money doesn't necessarily mean that you know, it's an industry plant. I don't know. I think it's a weird stance to take. Anyways, you guys, let's get into the actual review at this point. So if you've survived this long, thank you. Um, let's get into like my actual thoughts about this game and why I do think some people will see a 10 out of 10 in this game. First things first, the idea of calling it a video game, for me in my opinion, I think it's strange. I think this is very much interactive media. It is definitely cross media. It's trying to do the thing of it's an interactive movie. I think the entire game takes 3 hours long, but there's actually only 30 minutes of gameplay, and gameplay is in quotations. The gameplay typically is you're riding a skateboard, you're riding a shopping cart, you're hitting baseball bats. It's a bunch of really small segmented micro games that kind of just push the narrative a little bit further. A lot of it more is like experiential. They're trying to showcase to you what this music feels to the creator, to the artist, to the protagonist of the story. And I understand that and I get that and I feel that. And a lot of I think of what this game is trying to say, I appreciate so much because as someone who really, really loves music, as someone who has tons of great memories, and a lot of those memories are attached to music, whether I was listening to it on my iPod, whether I was listening to it on a CD player, whether I was listening to it on my Xbox laying in bed, etc. Like music has a way of attaching itself to moments, whether, it's that one time I heard that one song at the end of a movie, right? There's a lot of movies that I've attached myself to certain soundtracks, a lot of moments in my life that if I was listening to this music, I attach myself to that moment. And I understand that sentiment, I understand that feeling. Uh, and I appreciate that this game is trying to capture this. With all that being said, this is a very specific person's memories that doesn't translate very well to people who do not resonate with that culture, who do not resonate with that type of upbringing. um and this is a very the three kids in this story are very privileged. They're very stuck up and obnoxious and very ignorant to reality, in my opinion. As someone who grew up as a minority, there's like a pretty early scene where the main character yells at their dad down the from the stairwell, and then their dad's just like, "Oh, okay, oh well." Like, hell no. If I was to yell at my parents, I would have got the snot beat out of me. There's no way that my mom or dad would have allowed that. There's like another point where one of the other main characters is like is trying to stand up to their parents and like threatens to like become a criminal if da 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 doesn't happen, right? My parents again would have whooped my butt if I told them stuff like that. So it's a very skewed reality that I'm sure a lot of people resonate with, respectfully. And I think people who, put tens and tens at their score for something like this, I'm sure they were hit in some type of nostalgia feeling that, you know, overwhelmed them. And they probably couldn't help it but to give this game a perfect review because in their head, it perfectly encapsulates a feeling for them. And I get that. And just as someone who didn't resonate with that as much, I don't, I don't see a 10 out of 10, and I can see why a lot of people don't see a 10 out of 10. If your reality isn't close to what these kids are experiencing, then, I don't see how that can move the needle for a lot of people, which is why I think we're starting to see this huge controversy where For very select people out there, most of the people who reviewed this, yes, this is a perfect feeling of how they felt when they were younger. But for a lot of us, no, this is not, reminiscent of my reality. If this was, but again, that's what makes this game so special. This is someone's feelings and their memories and their emotions about a certain time in their life. And I appreciate that. If this was mine, it'd be me and the boys driving down the street, bumping things like Big Sean and Kendrick. That's what we listen to a lot of. So I think it's definitely hard, I think, to make something like this a universal experience. And when I was reading a lot of the reviews, a lot of people were claiming this to be a universal nostalgic feeling that a lot of us grew up with. And that's a very flawed way of looking at that. That's a very, narrow-minded view of, what this game is. So for a lot of people, no, it's not going to hit. And as far as the actual narrative is concerned, it is cringe fest. It is very poorly written most of the time. I do not like any of the characters in this. What I do say that I agree with is I agree with a lot of the sentiment of what's going on. There's certain parts that realism starts to fade, and you start to go into like this experiential atmospheric type of vibe. And a lot of times it goes, or a lot of times they connect it to a song that's being played, and I appreciate that and I get that. And at least for someone like who a lot of times would spend his time in high school just headphones up, laying in bed, listening to, something that I really resonate with, something I really feel to, something I could kind of drown myself into. It's like it's a feeling that is hard to explain and it's hard to visualize. And I think this game does do a really good job of visualizing those moments. And I think of, at least my closest comparison to what's going on to these characters. I remember being in high school, sneaking out, going to parties, you know, doing a lot of things that these characters are doing. A lot of it, yeah, those are things that I experienced to some degree. Where my group of friends, like these people, God no, we would have hated people like this. There's a character who they say this is metal all the time. Oh, that's so metal, bro. None of the songs in this game are metal, and nothing that they're doing is quote unquote metal. So it's just like stuff like that that's so awkward, so cringy, so poorly written. Doesn't understand most of the audience. It's speaking directly to a very narrow view of an audience, and I think that's where we get a little wrapped up into how does this game score very well. Because personally, if I was to score this game, I'd give it like a 5 or a 6. Maybe a 7 because it doesn't really waste your time, but the gameplay isn't great. So if you're judging it based off of a game, it's not great. The movie part of it isn't great. So if you're trying to judge it based off of movies like Superbad or, like, it's not close to those type of movies. The so I understand why a lot of people are super confused how this is failing on so many ways and reviewing so high. And I guess just from my optic, I just see it as a lot of people resonate with this type of world, and if that's you, kudos. You grew up very privileged. I'm sorry to tell you that. If someone resonated with this and didn't grow up privileged, I'd be happy to hear about that. But for me, I just think Mixtape is a game that resonates with people that are privileged. And a lot of us weren't privileged. A lot of us weren't, you know, allowed to yell at our parents this type of way. It's kind of crazy. Anyways, overall reviews of Mixtape, it's an okay game. I think it has a message to tell and it doubles down on that message, and that message does not resonate with most people in this world. And that's where the controversy stands. If I was to leave one final note, I would say, guys, stop giving IGN any credence in your world. If IGN gives the game a 10 out of 10 or a 0 out of 10 or anything like that, it's irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. So why are any of us, again, so fixated on what IGN says? I thought as a gaming community we all agreed IGN isn't S word, isn't shit, bro. Like, come on. I'm gonna leave it at that. Let me know down below if you guys played it, what your guys' thoughts are, and I'll see you guys in the next one.